Welcome back to our channel, where we dive deep into the glamorous, emotionally charged, and often treacherous world of Los Angeles fashion. Today is a beautiful day to unpack the complex layers of ambition, love, and desperate sacrifices that define our favorite characters. Settle in as we explore a shocking new development that threatens to shatter lives and redefine family loyalties. The gleaming corridors of Forrester Creations have always served as a spectacular facade, a world constructed of brilliant lighting, exquisite fabrics, and the illusion of absolute perfection. Yet, beneath this polished veneer of haute couture and corporate triumph, the shadows stretch long and dark, harboring secrets that possess the power to obliterate the very foundations of the families who walk these halls. For Electra Forrester, the building has recently felt less like a sanctuary of creative expression and more like a labyrinth of emotional torment. Caught in an agonizing and seemingly endless romantic crossfire between the Honorable Will Spencer and the fiercely protective R.J. Forrester, Electra has been navigating a minefield of her own making. However, nothing could have possibly prepared her for the devastating reality she was about to stumble upon, a reality that would irrevocably alter the trajectory of her life and the lives of everyone she holds dear. Wandering through the labyrinthine architecture of the Forrester building, seeking a momentary respite from the crushing weight of her indecision, Electra found herself drawn toward the secluded, dimly lit alcoves far removed from the bustling design studios and the vibrant energy of the executive suites. It was in one of these hidden, forgotten corners that she overheard a hushed, frantic exchange. The voices were familiar, yet their tone was entirely alien to the professional environment they inhabited. As Electra instinctively pressed herself against the cold marble wall, her breath catching in her throat, she recognized the authoritative, albeit trembling, voice of Daphne Rose Walton, a woman she had long admired and viewed as a steadfast mentor. The second voice, fractured by quiet, desperate sobs, belonged to Melissa Dillon, the newly appointed assistant whose life had recently become a swirling vortex of anxiety and fear. What Electra witnessed in that shadowed alcove was not a discussion of fabric swatches, marketing strategies, or corporate restructuring. It was a chilling, predatory transaction that reduced a human life to a mere commodity. Daphne, her face a mask of desperate, uncompromising resolve, was aggressively sliding a thick, legal document across a small glass table toward a visibly shaking Dillon. The words that spilled from Daphne's lips were a horrifying symphony of manipulation and profound grief. She was demanding that Dillon sign an ironclad, non-disclosure agreement, a contract that promised an astronomical sum of money and a guaranteed, meteoric rise within the ranks of Forrester Creations. But the price of this golden ticket was unimaginably cruel. Daphne was purchasing a child. She was demanding that Dillon hand over her unborn baby the very second it took its first breath in this world. The sheer magnitude of the revelation struck Electra with the force of a physical blow, paralyzing her in the shadows. The child growing inside Dillon was not just any child. It was Will Spencer's baby. The realization sent a catastrophic shockwave through Electra's entire being, shattering her perception of the world and the people she thought she knew. Daphne, driven to the absolute edge of sanity by the agonizing, suffocating trauma of her severe infertility, had entirely lost her moral compass. The desperate yearning to build a family with Carter Walton had warped Daphne's sense of right and wrong, transforming her from a compassionate leader into a ruthless opportunist who saw Dillon's unplanned pregnancy not as a tragedy to be supported, but as an undeserved miracle that could be bought and legally acquired. On the other side of this horrific bargain sat Melissa Dillon, a young woman entirely broken by the cruel circumstances of her existence. Electra watched in horrified fascination as Dillon's tears fell freely, staining the pristine white paper of the contract. Dillon was not acting out of a callous disregard for her unborn child. She was acting out of a visceral, paralyzing terror. The sinister shadow of her cousin, Remy Price, loomed large over her every waking moment. Remy's relentless extortion, his threats to expose her darkest secrets and utterly destroy the fragile life she was attempting to build, had backed Dylan into an inescapable corner. The paralyzing fear of losing her job, of being cast out onto the unforgiving streets of Los Angeles, of returning to the agonizing reality of sleeping in her car, had completely broken her spirit. In Daphne's monstrous offer, Dylan saw the only viable escape route from a life of perpetual torment and destitution. With a trembling hand that seemed to carry the weight of the entire world, Dylan picked up the pen. Electra's heart hammered violently against her ribs as she watched the young woman nod in tearful, defeated surrender. The ink flowed onto the page, legally binding Dylan to a future devoid of the child she carried, sealing a pact born of absolute despair and predatory exploitation. The sight of this transaction, the cold, calculated commodification of an innocent life, shattered Electra's paralysis. The profound betrayal of trust, the realization that her esteemed mentor could orchestrate such a deeply unethical and inhumane exchange, ignited a fierce, righteous indignation within Electra's soul. She could no longer remain a silent witness to this atrocity. Stepping out of the concealing shadows, Electra's sudden appearance shattered the clandestine atmosphere of the alcove. The air instantly grew heavy with a suffocating tension as both Daphne and Dylan snapped their heads toward the intruder. Daphne's eyes widened in momentary panic before quickly hardening into a defensive, uncompromising glare, her maternal desperation overriding any lingering sense of professional shame. Dylan, however, completely crumbled. The pen slipped from her trembling fingers, clattering loudly against the glass table, as a raw, guttural sob tore from her throat. Electra, her voice trembling with a potent mixture of fury and profound sorrow, confronted them. She demanded to know how Daphne, a woman of such purported integrity, could ever justify treating a human child as a bargaining chip, a piece of corporate leverage to be traded for promotions and silence. Daphne's defense was a chilling testament to her psychological fracture. She argued, with a terrifyingly calm conviction, that she was not exploiting Dylan, but rather saving her. She painted a grim picture of Dylan's future as a destitute, single mother, eternally hunted by Remy Price, struggling to provide even the most basic necessities for a child. Daphne positioned herself as a savior, offering the baby a life of unparalleled privilege, boundless love, and absolute security with Carter. She rationalized the financial and professional incentives not as a bribe, but as a generous severance package for Dylan's maternal sacrifice. The twisted logic, born of profound sorrow and desperate longing, only served to sicken Electra further, highlighting the immense, unbridgeable chasm between Daphne's desires and basic human morality. But it was Dylan's reaction that truly plunged Electra into an inescapable emotional abyss. Rather than expressing relief at being discovered, rather than grasping at Electra as a lifeline to escape this horrific contract, Dylan launched herself forward, grasping Electra's hands with a desperate, bruising grip. Through a blinding veil of tears, Dylan dropped to her knees, her voice a fragile, broken whisper as she began to beg. She pleaded with Electra, with an intensity that defied reason, to keep this dark transaction an absolute secret. She begged Electra never to breathe a single word of this to Will Spencer. The sheer desperation in Dylan's eyes was haunting, a reflection of a soul that had completely surrendered to its own destruction for the sake of another's salvation. Electra was entirely bewildered, her mind struggling to process the agonizing paradox of Dylan's plea. Why would a mother, forced into selling her child under the threat of poverty and blackmail, beg the discoverer of this crime to remain silent? Dylan's explanation, delivered through ragged breaths and continuous tears, revealed a depth of tragic, misguided nobility that Electra could scarcely comprehend. Dylan knew Will Spencer's heart better than anyone. She knew his unwavering sense of honor, his deep-seated morality, and his absolute commitment to doing the right thing, regardless of the personal cost. If we were to discover that Dylan was carrying his child, he would instantly abandon his pursuit of Electra. He would chain himself to Dylan out of a profound sense of duty and obligation, sacrificing his own happiness and his true desires on the altar of responsibility. Dylan's voice cracked as she painted the bleak picture of what Will's life would become. He would resent the obligation. He would mourn the loss of his future with Electra, and his vibrant, passionate spirit would be slowly extinguished by the suffocating weight of a loveless, obligatory union. Dylan confessed, with a heartbreaking vulnerability, that she loved Will far too much to subject him to such a miserable existence. Furthermore, she loved him enough to want him to be with the woman he truly desired, Electra. By signing away her child to Daphne, by erasing herself from the equation and securing her own financial survival, Dylan believed she was performing the ultimate act of love. She was orchestrating a blind, devastating sacrifice to ensure that Will and Electra could build a beautiful, unburdened future together. The profound tragedy of Dylan's logic struck Electra like a physical assault, leaving her gasping for air in the dimly lit hallway. Dylan was not just selling her baby. She was sacrificing her entire identity, her motherhood, and her own emotional well-being to protect Will's conscience and to pave the way for Electra's happiness. It was a twisted, agonizing martyrdom that placed an impossible, crushing burden directly onto Electra's shoulders. Dylan implored Electra to see the grim reality of their situation. If Electra exposed the truth, the fallout would be apocalyptic. Remy Price would destroy Dylan. Will's life would be derailed by duty. Daphne's heart would be irrevocably broken, and Electra would lose the man she loved to a situation born of tragic circumstance rather than genuine affection. Electra stood completely paralyzed, the silence of the alcove broken only by the sound of Dylan's quiet, desperate weeping. The revelation had violently thrust Electra into a terrifying maze of guilt and moral ambiguity. If she remained silent, she would become an active accomplice in a horrific, unethical transaction, allowing a child to be bought and sold within the very walls of her family's company. She would be building her own romantic happiness with Will upon a foundation of absolute deceit, knowing that the child Daphne raised was the flesh and blood of the man she loved. Every smile she shared with Will, every moment of intimacy, will be tainted by the corrosive knowledge of the sacrifice Dylan had made in the shadows. Conversely, if Electra chose to blow the whistle, if she chose to drag this dark secret into the unforgiving light of day, the destruction would be absolute and indiscriminate. She would be the catalyst for Dylan's total ruin, unleashing the full, devastating force of Remy Price's blackmail. She would shatter Daphne and Carter's lives, exposing her mentor as a desperate predator. And, perhaps most agonizingly, she would lose Will forever, watching helplessly as his noble nature bound him to a woman he cared for but did not truly love, effectively destroying the romantic future she had so desperately sought to navigate. The choice before her was not between right and wrong. It was a choice between two distinct, utterly devastating forms of destruction. The emotional weight of this discovery fundamentally altered Electra's perception of the ongoing rivalry between Will and RJ. RJ's obsessive, manipulative attempts to shield her from Will now seemed almost trivial, a childish game played in the shallow end of a very dark, dangerous ocean. RJ was fighting for her affection with aggressive tactics, but Will was unknowingly the center of a tragic sacrifice that spanned generations. How could she possibly continue to entertain RJ's advances when her heart was tethered to Will, a man whose future was currently being bought and sold in the hidden corners of her own family's empire? The love quadrangle that had previously consumed her thoughts was now overshadowed by a moral crisis of unprecedented proportions. As Electra slowly backed away from the table, her eyes darting between Daphne's hardened, desperate face and Dylan's broken, pleading form, she realized that she was no longer just an observer in this tragedy. She was now a crucial, burdened participant. The gilded cage of Forrester Creations had never felt more suffocating, its glamorous facade completely stripped away to reveal the raw, bleeding desperation of the people trapped within it. Electra turned and fled the alcove, her footsteps echoing hollowly against the marble floors, but she knew with absolute certainty that she could not outrun the truth. The secret she now carried was a ticking time bomb, a volatile explosive carefully concealed beneath the fabric of their daily lives, waiting for the inevitable moment when the pressure would become too great and the entire world they knew would be blown to pieces. The labyrinth of guilt had closed its doors around Electra Forrester, trapping her in a profound darkness where every potential path led to heartbreak and ruin. The blind, devastating sacrifice of Melissa Dillon had fundamentally rewritten the rules of engagement, transforming a simple tale of young love into a harrowing saga of exploitation, desperation, and the terrifying lengths to which people will go when pushed beyond the absolute limits of their endurance. As the days move forward, the weight of this silence will undoubtedly begin to fracture Electra's spirit, setting the stage for a confrontation that will test the very limits of love, loyalty, and human morality.